Thank you. I just want to thank you all for coming, especially the workers who came up here to lobby on this bill. A few of you were in my office earlier today, and I want to thank you for your dedication. And Juana and Sandra especially, who I was like, I know she was here, our time silence breakers who, in the labor movement, we always note that those of us who maybe have law degrees or fancy jobs, it's one thing for us to speak out, but when you're speaking out and you have everything on the line, that's what strengthens everybody else. So thank you for your dedication on that and continuing to work on behalf of all women in the workplace and using your voice to do so. I also want to thank, in particular, SAG-AFTRA, because when all of the issues started coming out, and the press really cares about what happens in the halls of the legislature. They care about what happens in Hollywood, but they don't always care about what happens in the back room at Burger King. It's not sexy, right? They don't know who the boss is. They don't know who the worker is. And for some reason, they have not really told those stories in the way that they should. And SAG-AFTRA could have just kept it to their own workers in their own workplace, but they have extended and done more than we have ever imagined to ensure that low-wage workers, that service workers were included in this fight. And I think that partnership in labor is important. As somebody who comes from the labor movement, that's what we call solidarity. And so it is that work that is so important, and Gabrielle, of course, for the work that you do. It's exciting to have the future First Lady here. We're hoping this is a long-standing relationship in dealing with labor in our next governor, of course. And I had to tell Jane Fonda, I actually think one of the reasons I ended up in the labor movement is the first real movie my mom ever let me watch was 9 to 5. And I was inspired by these character women who were like, we're just not going to take this shit anymore. And so that's been my mantra since then. And so it's so exciting to have people come here and talk about these issues that are so important. We know in the legislature we have passed some of the strongest labor laws in the nation. We continue to lead the nation in ways to protect workers, in ways to protect female workers, but none of that matters if those workers can be silenced. None of that matters if those workers can't take their complaints to the labor commissioner or in a court of law. And so what we have seen is companies from the very lowest wage workers to the very highest wage using binding arbitration as a means to circumvent all of those great laws we've passed. So it's time to get rid of forced arbitration. And this is the only way we'll ensure that those laws we've already passed, the public policy that we've all said is good public policy, that the governor has already signed, actually gets implemented, is getting rid of this tool that has kept far too many women and workers down. So this bill is really important in this point of time, and it's important not just for sexual harassment victims, obviously, that's at the forefront of our mind, but it's important for wage discrimination cases, racial discrimination, pay equity. We know that there are so many things that are hidden and kept in the dark because of forced binding arbitration, and it's time that the sunlight shines, and we know who those bad employers are, and we know who's doing this type of oppression to workers, and this is the only way we'll do that. So thank you for coming out. Thank you, all of you, for your commitment and continued commitment to women, to workers, and to this movement. And thank you so much, of course, to my sisters at the California Labor Fed and the trial attorneys for ensuring that we continue to work on these issues together. Thank you.
I'm Jane Fonda, and I'm a worker. People tend to forget that we may be famous. We're workers. I am fortunate enough to be represented by several unions, including SAG-AFTRA and Equity. I'm protected by those unions, and it means a lot to me. I frankly never thought I would live to see the day when a Me Too movement and a Time's Up movement would become possible, that women could speak out and be believed. I'm well aware of the fact that the reason that this burst forth from Hollywood is because the women who first spoke out were white and famous. And I'm here because I believe that those of us who are famous need to use our voices to help lift the voices of the women who are less visible and extremely vulnerable and are subject to terrible grievances in the workplace. The Me Too movement is the coming forward of victims saying what has happened to them. Time's up is the next step. It's what are we going to do about it? And at the very beginning of Time's Up, we got a letter from 700,000 farm worker women, the National Alliance of Women Farm Workers, and it was transformational. It really made us understand deeply the meaning of intersectionality. We realized that if we're going to make this a real movement that's going to achieve changes in the workplace, that we have to stand side by side with women across all sectors. I just want to read an excerpt from the letter that the farm workers sent to us. Even though we work in very different environments, we share a common experience of being preyed upon by individuals who have the power to hire, fire, blacklist, and otherwise threaten our economic, physical, and emotional security. Complaining about anything, even sexual harassment, seems unthinkable because too much is at risk. The ability to feed our families and preserve our reputations, unquote. One of the very first things that we in Hollywood realized as this movement began to burst forth was the problem of forced arbitration and non-disclosure agreements. How many of my peers in Hollywood talk to me about this barrier that they face to coming forward and making their stories public? This is such a barrier also to our being able to see patterns in the workplace because it's all secret. So I hope that what we're doing today and here at the panel, and I'm spending the day meeting with your husband and Governor Brown to talk about Lorna Gonzalez's bill 3080, which will stop forced arbitration, make it a question of choice, and non-disclosure agreements. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I work with Restaurant Opportunity Centers United, and I've been traveling in various states, including Michigan and DC, with the founder, Saru Jayaramanan. And the situation with tipped workers in restaurants it really gives a very concrete example of the relationship between sexual harassment and pay equity. There are 4.3 million restaurant workers in the United States. It's the fastest growing industry of all. 70% of those people are women. The federal law mandates a salary of $2.13 an hour. Just think about that. Plus tips. So when you get your check, the entire check goes to taxes, and what you are left with to support yourself and your family, because the median age of restaurant workers, this is not just after college, I'll do this for a little while for pocket change and then I'll go on to real work. This is, for a growing number of Americans, their main work, including a lot of previously unionized people in the middle of this country who lost their unionized jobs. 1 in 5 restaurant workers live in poverty. 3 times the use of food stamps. Here are the people who serve us our food, but they rely on food stamps. They can't eat in the very places where they work. They can't afford to. You know, we worry so much about, my God, is this chicken free range? Is this food organic? But we don't think about the actual human beings that are bringing the food to us. Now, the NRA, the National Restaurant Association, the other NRA, is one of the most powerful industry lobbies in the country, and they have prevented restaurant workers from earning a fair wage. They spend tens of millions of dollars trying to convince people that should restaurant workers get a fair wage, it will destroy the restaurant industry and it will do away with tips. The fact is, there are 7 states in the United States that provide one fair wage for restaurant workers, where restaurant workers earn the same minimum wage as other, not that it's fair, but it's the minimum wage that other workers earn, plus tips. California, Washington, Oregon, Nevada, Montana, Minnesota, and Alaska. And in those 7 states, the restaurant industry is booming. It hasn't been hurt at all by moving and it's been going on for decades, to one fair wage. And we are among the highest tipping states of all. So the word that is being put out by the NRA is simply false. Here's what's really important right now to focus on. In the 7 states that provide one fair wage, sexual harassment and abuse was cut in half.
Pay equity.
And poverty was cut in half. I think that's really important to keep in mind. The relationship between pay equity and sexual abuse.
Thank you.
What conversation?
Well, the conversation about what's taking place with equity in terms of Time's Up, and this conversation we're having here, how do you feel Time's Up is dealing with this and helping to shape it, and can more be done? Yes.
As Jennifer said, yeah, more needs to be done. I mean, there's a world of things that need to be done. I think it was like the domino effect. It started in Hollywood for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. And then very quickly we began to see that we're talking about an epidemic of entitlement that exists across all sectors of the economy and across the country. There has been such an extensive outpouring of stories that one of the things that's changed is just everyone's awareness. People are being much more careful. And I think we're fighting now for the structural changes that can make systemic change. You know, having our stories heard is one thing. Changing the institutions and the laws that allow abuse and discrimination to continue is what has to happen now. That's what Time's Up represents. And I think our being here today is an important sign of it, and I just think we have to keep talking and fighting. And I'm going to be meeting with the governor in a little while. I've known him since the 70s, and I love Jerry Brown, but he needs to sign this legislation. He needs to sign it.
Make sure, I'll be with you there.
He needs to understand this is the time, this is the moment to protect women, okay?